everyone, welcome to a sip and dip resin tutorial. Before we get started with today's class, there are a couple of really important notes around your safety with resin. Please make sure that you are wearing your gloves provided. Long clothing is optional but definitely preferred, covering most of your skin, and safety goggles if you have them as well. That way most of your skin is covered and we are eliminating any risks of getting resin in our eyes. If you do find that you get resin on any of your skin, nose, eyes, ears, mouth, please make sure it is thoroughly rinsed out. If you find that there's any further issues after you have thoroughly rinsed out the resin or off the resin, please seek medical advice. We do have a safety data sheet for resin on our website. We do ask that you make yourself thorough with the sheet, read through it and understand your personal responsibility around your safety with resin and working with this chemical. The safety data sheet can be found on the website, just at the bottom on www.sipanddip.com.au. Apart from that, let's jump into learning how to make this beautiful lazy Susan. Alrighty everyone, so the first thing we're going to do to start our lazy Susan today is wipe it down with an alcohol wipe, or if you've just got some icy profile spray and a paper towel or normal baby wipe, you can use that as well. The reason why we're wiping down our board is to get any of the dust, dirt, oils, anything that can collect on our boards. Wiping it off, making sure it's super clean so that none of our resin is going to repel off anywhere on our boards. With our lazy Susans, we want to make sure that we're wiping down the sides as well. So really thorough clean. And then you can leave your wipe to the side because you might use it later to wipe anything off your gloves or anything like that. Alrighty. We're going to start mixing our resin. So you'll have a mixing cup and a big spatula and your resin pre-poured for you. You're going to pour your resin into that mixing cup. So it doesn't matter what part you put in first, just as long as all three of those cups are thoroughly scraped out so that we're keeping our resin ratio nice and equal. So we use a 2:1 ratio resin for our classes and our take-home kits. So you will have 2 of one part and 1 part of another. So giving them a good scrape down and making sure that all of that resin, or as much as possible, is scraped off the sides and going into that cup. And you can just stack those containers when you're done with them and pop them to the side so they're not in the way. You're also best to do this step on the table, not on top of your board, just in case you dribble any little bits of unmixed resin onto your board. It's not going to stick later on. Now when we're mixing our resin, it's really important that this cup stays flat on the table and we're holding the top of our cup, we're not cupping the sides. The reason why we're not cupping the side is so that we're not heating up our resin too fast before it's ready to heat up. So we're just going to hold the top of our cups flat on the table, spatula in, touching the bottom of our cup at all times. That way we're going to get a nice even mix and we're not just going to be stirring the top of our resin. And we're working in big circular motions like this as well. Again, so we're getting a nice even mix. It's not just going to be the center of our resin, it's going to be everything moving around. And we're working at about the speed that I have got here. We don't want to be mixing too fast, otherwise we're going to end up with lots of air bubbles in our resin. Mixing like this, you will get a couple of smaller air bubbles. Most of the time they will pop themselves by the time we pour it into our other cups and then onto our board. They'll pop themselves. Otherwise they'll rise up to the surface and just pop while it's curing. But if they're smaller, that's not going to cause an issue. If you have some bigger air bubbles that come up to the top of your resin while you're stirring, you do want to try and pop them. We don't want to pour those big bubbles onto our board because if they pop on our board, they will leave little holes in our work, particularly when we're working with something like our Susans that are dribbling over the edge. So we're mixing that resin We are going to be stirring for at least 8 minutes when we're working with this amount of resin. You are allowed to swap hands when you're stirring, and you are allowed to change directions of stirring as well, as long as we're still working with those big circular motions, making sure that we've got a nice even stir happening. And obviously still holding the top of our cup, not cupping the sides. Resin is very heat dependent, so if you're working in an area that is too hot, your resin is going to be ready too soon. And if you're working in an area that is a little bit cooler, your resin is going to take a little bit longer. Every couple of minutes, I'm going to pick up my cup and just give the sides a good scrape. That thicker part that we use often sticks to the outside of our cup, so we want to make sure that we're regularly scraping to pull it back into the middle so we can give it a good mix through. While you are mixing, when you first start, it will be quite cloudy. You can kind of see here. It's quite cloudy and it's often very streaky, so you can kind of see these silky lines following your spatula. We're going to keep stirring until it ends up nice and clear, or until we can't see those silky lines. Now, resin doesn't always clear up, particularly if it is a little bit cooler. It will often stay quite cloudy. What you can do is cup the outside of your cup once you see those silky lines starting to disappear. So I'm going to do that. And that will help warm up your resin just that little bit, and it'll hopefully start to clear up a little bit. Because we are pouring our resin into pigment colours, it won't matter if it is a little bit cloudy. You're not going to be able to tell the difference because it's going to be coloured. If you are working with clear resin, or you're wanting to put clear resin on your board, then I would suggest doing this method that I'm doing here, which is just to cup the outside of your resin just for that last like minute or so of stirring, to hopefully clear it up a little bit more. Want to make sure that we're still scraping the outside of our cup as well, and keeping an eye out for those silky lines, or where you can see the difference between the two parts. If you're feeling your cup get too warm in your hands and there's heat coming off your resin, then you have overstirred. So if you feel that, you need to get moving on to the next step as soon as possible. Alrighty, so my resin is definitely mixed through. There's no silky lines there. And if I do the run test, I can't see the difference between two parts when I'm looking through that. It is still a little bit foggy, but that's fine. I'm not going to be using any clear resin on my board today. So what I'm going to do is scrape that big spatula off just on the side of my cup and pop it to the side. Reason being, reason why we take the spatula out and pop it to the side is just so that we're not going to feel inclined to scrape this cup. If we've got any little bits of resin sitting on the outside of our cup that's not fully stirred and we scrape it into our pigments, that's going to go straight onto our board and we're going to have unset resin. So it's safer to take the spatula out. I'm just going to line up my colours that I've got here today, and then I'm just going to evenly separate this resin into those pigment colours. Obviously, if you would like a little bit more of one colour or a little bit less of another, then you can put less or more in that cup. People often use less of the golds or the silvers or the bronzes just because they prefer to use it as an accent colour, and it can often overtake your work a little bit. So we're just letting the last of the resin drip out, we're not going to scrape it out, and then we can just pop that cup to the side. Now we're going to stir our pigments through. We're going to stir them the exact same way that we just stirred our resin, but not for as long. So when you look at your pigment cup from the side, at the moment I can see all my red sitting down the bottom and lots of clear towards the top. And I'm just going to mix until that pigment is nice and even. So it's not looking darker down the bottom or lighter up the top. You still want to scrape your cups when you're mixing your pigments as well. And scraping the bottom of your cup is really important because obviously that's where our pigment was sitting. If our pigment's not mixed through properly, we're going to have chunks of pigment sitting on our board where it's not going to set. If you have any pigments that are metallic colours, you will have those kind of black lines through your pigment following where you're stirring. So definitely don't mix until they go away because they will not go away. So just making our way through our pigment colours until they're all stirred through. Alrighty, so I have my pigments all mixed together there. Alrighty, so what we're going to do on our board today is called a dirty pour. So you will have that spare cup there. This is what we're going to use to do our pour. What you are going to do is pour little bits of each colour into this cup until we've used all of our resin or our cup is almost full to the top. Then we're going to flip it upside down on our board and then lift it. All that colour is going to fall out, and that's what we call a dirty pour. Now, when you're putting your colours into this cup, if you want your colours to be more crossed over, intertwined, and to have more happening on your board, you want to do your layers of colour quite small so that you have more layers throughout your cup. If you're wanting your board to be less intricate, less happening, and a bit more blocky, is a way that lots of people describe it, is to do bigger chunks of colour in your cup. So I'm going to start with my red. I'm going to take all those spatulas out so that I'm not inclined to scrape my cup. I'm going to start with my red, and I'm going to go for the bigger layers in my dirty pour. So I'm going to aim for each colour to go into this cup twice. So I've got my red, green, white, And I'm going to use a little bit less gold than my other colors. So I've got all 4 in there once, and then I'm doing my second layer of them all. Rest of that red, not scraping our cups. Rest of that green. White. And a little bit of gold. Alrighty, now I'm going to flip this cup upside down onto my Susan, straight into the middle there, and I'm going to let it sit for about 30 seconds just for all of that resin to fall down to the bottom of my cup. So once all that resin has dripped down, you'll be able to see through the top of your cup, so I can't yet see through it. I'm going to wait a little bit longer. I can see through to the other side of that cup now, so I'm going to lift up the cup and let the resin pour out. You can let more dribble out of the cup if you would like, but I'm not too phased. Then you're going to lift up your Susan and let that resin cover the surface. So you want to try and get the majority of it covered first before you let any drip off the edge. So getting it nice and close to the edge, but not quite over it. You're best to have your board right up sideways so it's moving quite fast, otherwise it's going to take way too long and your resin will start to set and become quite slow before you get it anywhere near the edges. And now that I've got the majority of my board covered, I can start moving around and getting those edges covered and letting little bits drip off the side. You can use your finger just to touch up those little edges as well if you've got some little drips happening to make it a little bit faster. Before I place my Susan back down, I'm just going to wipe my tablecloth. So I'm just wiping a little spot on my tablecloth so that when I put the center of my Susan down, it's not going to stick. And I'm just going to touch up these outsides. Now from here, if you're happy with your design, you can obviously leave it as is. I'm just going to take that first layer of gloves off so I can work with clean gloves. You can obviously leave it as is, or if you've got some little bits of extra colour in your cups, you can use them to add over the top. So I'm probably going to add a little bit of red through mine and some gold. And then I'm going to use my straw to blow it around, and that way you can also see how to do that as well. So I'm just going to dribble some little bits of red through where mine is super green. And probably a little bit of gold with it as well. So you can kind of play around with your design here. And then I'm going to use my straw to blow that around. So biggest thing with your straw is make sure that you are blowing on a clean end. So if you use your straw and then put it down on the table, make sure you don't have resin on it, otherwise you're going to get resin in your mouth. So I'm just blowing over the top of that colour to spread it out a little bit. Just like that. So you can continue to play around with it a little bit. Once you're happy with it, you can run your finger along the sides and touch up the sides of your Susan so it doesn't have those drip marks there. And then when you're happy with it, that's it. You can leave it as is. I'll sprinkle my when it's done.